Welcome to Politics Done Right. I am your host, Egberto Willies. This is a progressive program that will take the mystery out of politics. This is the program that will encourage you to make sure government becomes we the people. Whether you are liberal, progressive, conservative, or otherwise, you get to air your point of view. We are an independent media outlet that, unlike mainstream media beholden to corporations, we only owe allegiance to you. Remember, you can also send me a tweet at EGBERTOWILLIES. That is at Egberto Willies. Let us engage. It is Politics Done Right. Welcome to Politics Done Right from the studios of KPFT 90.1 FM, Houston, your community radio station. We have a great program for you today. Jen Psaki School Fox News Peter Doocy on the ills of the Florida Don't Say Gay bill. Why does a supposedly more efficient corporate sector need the government to bail them out of their supply chain failures? Darius Kamali on identity politics, the war in Ukraine, and much more. Folks, we are going to get busy. Well, I'm in a bit more casual abodes right now, but anyhow, I want you to see exactly how Jen Psaki took care of Doocy. She wasn't really trying to make a big point, but in the process, I think she did. She really made him look rather silly as he tried to bring up the Just Say Gay bill and ask, how early can we start teaching about gender identity? I have a message for him, however, but let's go ahead and listen to Jen, and then we'll take it on the other side.
And then what about this new law in Florida? At what age does the White House think that students should be taught about sexual orientation and gender identity?
Well, I would say, first of all, Peter, we have spoken to the Don't Say Gay bill in the past, I believe is what you're referring to, and made clear that as we look at this law, what we think it's a reflection of is politicians in Florida propagating misinformed, hateful policies that do absolutely nothing to address the real issues. The Department of Education is well positioned and ready to evaluate what to do next, and its implementation, whether its implementation violates federal civil rights law. But I would note that parents across the country are looking to, national, state, and district leaders to support our nation's students, to ensure that kids are treated equally in schools, and that is certainly not. This is not a reflection of that.
And so, just the last one. So, if you guys oppose this law that bans classroom instruction about sexual orientation and gender identity in K through 3. Does White House support that kind of classroom instruction before kindergarten?
Do you have examples of schools in Florida that are teaching kindergartners about sex education?
I'm just asking for the president's opinion.
I think that's a relevant question, because I think this is a politically charged, harsh law that is putting parents and LGBTQ plus kids in a very difficult, heartbreaking circumstance. And so I actually think that's a pretty relevant question. Go ahead.
On the Ukraine atrocities, Jake referenced some of the images that all our news organizations have been gathering. Is the administration able to gather other and document other cases that you have assembled that we...
I hope you heard that. But in effect, what she's telling him is, hey, guy, the reality is this is a painful issue, especially in a society where it have very little regard to people that are different many a times. But you know what? I have a special message. Somebody, and this I had to learn this on my own. But it turns out that they don't have to learn about gender identity. The people that are transgender or folks that have these what some may call gender issues, because you know what, deep inside they know. You know who needs to learn? We do. And when we start to realize that, things will change, not only in the issue of gender, but on several other issues where there are differences. all the conservative in the rooms, they would want you to believe that you can't have government involved in stuff. It's socialism. We can't have government helping people. We can't have government helping people, giving them a hands up. Oh, no, we can't do that. That is socialism, right? We preach that. They want us to believe that. They want us to settle for less and less and less. But now that we have a supply chain problem, now that we have a trucking problem, guess who is solving the problem? And you won't hear industry saying much. You won't hear industry saying, oh, thank you, government, for doing what we didn't do because we're too greedy. You won't see that. I want you to listen to Pete Buttigieg and the president. And then I have quite a bit to say afterwards. But this is important, and please listen to it in the proper context. Let's get busy with this one.
And we just completed the 90-day sprint to get these actions off the ground, so I'm pleased to provide an update. In order to create debt-free pathways into the career for more people, including more women and drivers of color, we teamed up with the Department of Labor to grow the number of registered apprenticeships for high-quality paid on-the-job training. We're investigating truck leasing arrangements to make sure that they're above board. We're working on truck driver pay, including those hours when drivers don't get paid even though they're very much on the job because they're waiting for somebody else. We're making it easier for veterans to join the trucking workforce, partnering with the Department of Defense. And of course, we are fixing roads and bridges across America. One trucker told me infrastructure is our workplace, and now we are enhancing that workplace thanks to unprecedented funding through the President's infrastructure law. And yes, that includes working with states to use that funding to build more safe truck parking, because we know that that is such a central issue for truckers today. These actions are going to help us recruit more drivers and, just as importantly, retain them, to help keep down shipping delays, rein in the price of goods at a time when we're fighting inflation with everything we've got. And of course, supporting these essential workers is just the right thing to do. I'm proud of all we got done in this 90-day sprint, but I promise you to the trucking community, and I promise you, Mr. President, this is just the beginning.
Over the course of my presidency, the economy has now created 7.9 million jobs. More jobs in the first 14 months than any president ever, in large part because of all of you. Not a joke. Unemployment's at 3.6%, down from 6.4% when we took office. The fastest decline in unemployment at the start of any presidential term ever recorded. And after a long stretch, Americans are back to work. Americans are back to work. An economy has gone from being on the mend to being on the move. And the economy we're building a strong economy, one where hardworking Americans can live with dignity, support their families, build a better life, and a better life for their children as well. All of you here today are people our economy should be built around, because you all are the people who literally make it run. I have nothing against investment bankers. They could all retire and nothing much would change. You all quit, everything comes to a halt. Think about it. I'm not joking. During the pandemic, a lot of Americans have been introduced to a term you all know well, and Pete used it, supply chain. A simple term. Supply chain is a journey. The journey of a product to get to a customer's doorstep. That's what it is. And during the pandemic, those chains were interrupted. Factory closures around the world, not just the United States, around the world, caused backups and delays because of COVID. At the same time, because of the strength and speed of our recovery, Americans had more money in their pockets than they had in a long time. During the pandemic, they wanted to spend that money not on restaurants or vacations, which are now coming back as well, but on hard goods. They wanted home improvements, televisions, automobiles, things that had to be transported. The very products that slowed down by disruption of the supply chain. Demand was high. Supply was interrupted. And the recipe for higher prices and long delays. That's exactly what we saw not only here, but all around the world. So we knew we needed every tool at our disposal to address the problem. And the best way to do it was to invest in people who make the supply chain run. Trucking moves about 70% of all the goods in this country, 70%. And truck drivers are facing real challenges. The average driver waits 4.5 hours for their truck to be loaded and unloaded during an 11-hour shift, and 40% of their day. And often they don't get paid for that wait time. Back in 1978, the average truck driver's pay was $34 an hour in today's dollars. Last year, it was $25 an hour, nearly a 30% decline. In this iconic American industry, it's getting harder and harder to raise a family with dignity and pride that you deserve. And it's no surprise so many drivers left their jobs. The workforce is getting older. But look, it's getting harder and harder to recruit new drivers, particularly women and people of color, to an industry that this nation and our economy desperately needs at full strength. The good news is that since I took office, we've begun to turn things around. In fact, in 2021 was the best year for trucking employment since 1994. There are now 35,000 more trucking jobs than there were before the pandemic. But we all know we need to move faster, getting more people working in this industry in jobs they can rely on and raise a family on. That's why last December, we brought together industry and labor to tackle the problem facing drivers. And we listened. And when we heard that there were long wait times in many states for people to get their commercial driver's license or CDLs, we took action. We provided technical assistance as well as $57 million in federal funds to help states issue these CDLs faster. And I'm proud to report, because of Pete and others, so far in 2022, we're issuing CDLs at double the rate of last year, 120,000 in January and February alone. We also know that the key ingredient to getting and keeping more drivers was increasing training programs like the registered apprenticeships approved by the Department of Labor. Programs that allow aspiring drivers to earn while they learn, while making this essential job more attractive for potential drivers, regardless of age, background, and gender. The program has proven to be improved safety and better working conditions and better pay and benefits. Typically, it takes about 8 months to create a registered apprenticeship program. But because of Pete and others in the Department of Labor, we're able to cut the red tape, and now it takes as little as 2 days. In the last 90 days, 100 major employers have launched new registered apprenticeship programs. UPS, Domino's, Pepsi's, Albertsons, and more, along with the trade associations like the American Trucking Association, the National Minority Trucking Association, the Food Industry Association, and others. What that all adds up to is a strong foundation for the work ahead, a pipeline of hardworking men and women from all backgrounds, highly trained and highly motivated to get behind the wheel, including a whole lot of veterans, thanks to the Veterans Trucking Initiative known as Task Force Movement by Patrick Murphy, led by Patrick Murphy. But look, the labor and transportation departments are working closely with industry to tackle issues facing women in trucking, recruit and retrain more women drivers, so we can draw more Americans to work with increased wages, reduced wait times, and improved safety, and so much more. Folks, there's a heck of a lot more we have to do, Secretary Buttigieg has laid out some of the steps we're taking to make these jobs more attractive for more Americans. And it's all centered around listening to you, the drivers. Look, we've got to keep it going. We're building a better economy around American manufacturing and American supply chains. And thanks to the infrastructure law, and it wasn't my law, it was a bipartisan, one of the few great bipartisan things we've done this year. We're making the largest investment in American roads and bridges since literally the creation of the interstate highway system. And that means a bright future for American trucking. This country will be counting on you more than it ever has. So you should be able to count on us to keep investing in you and your families.
Here's my take on this. First of all, kudos to the administration. They are providing welfare to the private sector. Really, Egberto? Why are you saying that? I want to show you how greedy the private sector is, as they want to blame government for everything. Is government working smoothly as it should? No. But when you're when all you have on your mind is I don't want to pay taxes, and government has to live within the domain of not spending the money necessary to invest in things. That's what you get. But here is the most obscene thing. I don't see how Biden goes on national TV and talks the way he does about we're doing these great things for the supply chain, which he is, but shouldn't have to. Let's be clear here. I want you to let's break down what just happened, what Pete Buttigieg said, and what the president has said as well. This is important. One, the most important thing you need to know right now. Truck drivers in today's dollars were making 30 something dollars, about 34, 35 bucks 30 years ago, 30, 40 years ago. And today they are making 25 bucks. What that means is that the productivity that you saw on Wall Street when they said transportation, productivity in transportation, that was on the backs of the drivers. The drivers were taking home less money. They just took the money from the drivers, the corporations, that is. That's number one. Number two, they have a supply chain problem because you don't have enough drivers, because you don't pay them enough, and because of you sillily you offshored all your production. You created just-in-time inventory, which means if there's a lag in getting your transportation from wherever you're getting transport from, including overseas, wherever you get transport from, if there's a delay because you have just-in-time inventory, you get shortages. If you get shortages, people are willing to pay more to make sure they get it and the other person doesn't get it. That's called inflation. Inflation generated by the failure of the corporatocracy, not generated by we the people who are doing our jobs, right? So here we go. We have where now the president and his administration are now going to subsidize veterans, women, people of color, all these people that have not generally had the resources to go ahead and get CDLs, etc., training, etc. The government's going to subsidize them. Wait a minute. Who is that? Who are they subsidizing them for? The people who are getting the job? No, they are actually subsidizing the private sector. Because the private sector now says, I get a discount on training. It's the same thing with college education. It used to be you pay your taxes so that you can go to college at a low cost. Corporation paid a lot of taxes. Everybody paid taxes. People went to college, got educated on the cheap, and then they were brought back into the system to the corporations. And you don't feel bad that that you educated the people who did work for the corporation and made profit for people. That's fine. But now the corporations don't want to educate you. They don't want to pay taxes for public universities. They want you to get a loan from another corporation. So you are going to pay your education. You're going to pay the interest rates for the loans you take for your education. So you're enriching corporations for taking the education that you need to get a job where where he didn't pay taxes for your education. So you got to his front door educated, meaning that's a cost he doesn't have. And then he just take it all to the bank. People, the biggest problem here I see is people don't itemize and go through one at a time how these systems really put the onus on the average American system, the average American person every single time. The corporations always comes out ahead. We created a supply chain problem. We come out ahead by having raising interest rates. We paid truckers less. We still come out ahead because you know what? The government gonna step in to make sure that we drop inflation because now we're gonna have more truckers and the supply chain is gonna get better. Folks, they want you, the reason they keep you uneducated, the reason you see Republicans and neoliberal Democrats all the time, they don't want to invest in getting you too smart. Because if you understood how the system works, how you always paid the bill. I always tell my personal story. We just had a woman who talks about story, and it went like this. In the days when I had my company, the software company, I created a piece of software that could do something that nobody else in the country was doing. It was called dropping the RTS signal within a few milliseconds for an 8059 chip that couldn't do it. Okay? It's a serial chip. And that I was able to sell a whole ton of that software. Boeing used it in its test equipment. And when Boeing said, I want I don't remember it was an unlimited license or a 10,000 copy license. I don't remember what it was. I said, okay, and I charge him a whole bunch for it. And you know how I am. I feel guilty for it. Anytime I feel like a capitalist, I start to feel guilty, right? And I'm like, God, you know. Then to justify myself, I said, but that's a big corporation and they can handle that, right? And then I started to think and I said, my God, it's never the corporations who handle it. It's never the corporations who pay. It is always the person without pricing power. And that's the person at the bottom of the totem pole. The person who buys the airline ticket paid for that overpriced product. It's the person that doesn't have a say in that they're going to pay $5 a gallon for gasoline, even though it's not their fault. And still, we have people who want to defend the corporations who has the pricing power and the choice not to take your money away. The choice to still make a profit for shareholders, to still make a bonus. But because they have pricing power and you have nothing, you are an indentured servant. You are a antiseptic slave. Because you have no say, they can do as they please. And then whenever you ask them, why are you doing that? It's government's fault. They buy government, elect neoliberals, they screw up the supply chain, they underpay. Remember, there's a guy who had an ice cream place. He was paying $7.25 an hour. Then he jumped it up to $8 an hour. He couldn't get anybody to work during the pandemic. He went to $15 an hour. He couldn't handle the applications. We don't have a labor shortage. We have a shortage of corporations paying people what they're worth. And for all of you who are out there singing the song of the corporation, you are more a slave than anybody else because you have bought into the lie, the figment of the imagination that they inculcated into your brain. Please, folks, share these products, share these videos. Let's get people smarter. Let's let them understand how this system really works. It has nothing for it is the current layout. Even Biden had a beautiful speech. Biden is going to fix the supply chain problem. He's going to get a lot of truckers on the road, and he has. He has made it a lot easier. He has invested in these bills to put more truckers on the road. But you know what? You paid for it. You paid for it as opposed to the corporation who raised your prices and got you nothing other than taking your money and giving it to shareholders and executive bonuses, going onto Wall Street and said, look how much we made. And we even shipped less product and made more. We have oil. We have an overflow of oil, but you know what? We're not going to pump it. We're not going to turn on those spigots that are not running in Texas or in Arkansas or in Pennsylvania. We're going to leave them shut. You know why? We keep the product and we charge more. Folks, when you realize that you've been had, and I'm hoping people start to understand the things that I talk about. Are you ready for a KPFT special event? I hope you are, because guess what we're having? An evening with Amy Goodman of Democracy Now! Amy Goodman is an American journalist, columnist, and author best known as the co-founder and host of that show we all love, Democracy Now! The War and Peace Report. She's a liberal progressive daily news program produced in New York City. It's syndicated on the radio and television in the United States and broadcast on the internet. So on Thursday, April 14th, 2022, between 7 and 8:30, she's going to have an evening with her. And participating will be Stephanie Wells, who is the Pacifica Executive Director, as well as Dr. Robert Franklin, who is our KPFT General Manager. So please sign up. Register on the Zoom ID 850-4015-1036, or just go to kpft.org to get more information and click on that link to register. Today we have the honor of speaking to Darius Kamali. Darius is a former analyst with the State Department-supported International Monitor Institute, the visual evidence wing for several tribunals on war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. He transitioned to political documentary, then to television and feature animation producing in Hollywood as executive producer on a number of movies. Recently, the global pandemic provided the opportunity, like it has done for so many people, to change things around, and the catalyst for Kamali to return to his roots and his passion with two genre-bending, timely, thought-provoking, critically acclaimed books. First one titled Mistake of Identity, and the second one, Dog Whistling Dixie Past the Graveyard. First of all, welcome aboard Politics Done Right. Darius, how are you doing today?
Doing great. Happy to be here. Thank you so much. I really recognize myself with that intro there.
Yeah, well, I mean, hey, you're an important man with many different, what should I say? Many different options. Okay.
Many different hats. How about that?
Many different hats. That's what, you know, sometimes you're looking for that word that just doesn't come to you. A word as simple as HATS, hats.
There you go.
All right, let's get busy. Why mistaken identity? Why Dog Whistling Dixie Past the Graveyard? One of them actually seems sort of poetic.
Interesting that you say that. I don't know if people have defined both of these as poetic, but I'm not sure if they're traditional poetry. They're not traditional anything. I would say they're maybe genre benders is the best way to describe them. That's how we
named it, yeah.
There you go, without describing them. They're, in very broadly speaking, there is some poetry, especially in Dog Whistling Dixie Past the Graveyard, which obviously is a term that's composed of three different expressions there. That's somewhat lyrical. But I would say they combine several genres. One of them is in the Eastern tradition, there's such a thing as a Zen koan, right? Which is meant to be a riddle and a brain breaker to take you to another level of understanding. Then there's also the tradition that we had in the 19th century in the United States, which people have forgotten about, the aphoristic tradition. And of course, they're partly contemporary tweet, with people's attention spans these days. I think it's a good fit. And I didn't plan it that way. I was, during the pandemic, just writing down some of my thoughts and putting them down on social media, but sometimes in hidden formats, so only I would see them, just so that they're not lost.
Well, it's your story. Later, it was your story. It was your cloud.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. And later I realized, there's enough here to categorize and put out there as, books, or they're small books. They're light reading in the sense that, you can come back to them and go through them very quickly. But hopefully, in terms of content, a little heavier than that.
Well, I mean, from what I've read of it, it's not heavy. I mean, you can write heavy stuff in a form that makes it palatable to read. In other words, you want to put things in some sort of a format that educates, illustrates, but at the same time, you want to read, and that's what I think. I think that is where you're trying to go, if you will.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's exactly it. And you know what? I didn't sit and decide I'm going to devote this much time to writing these books. They were just ideas that came to me. And obviously, they're informed by my background, by my personal experience, both my ethnic experience, my professional experience, both in Hollywood and before that in human rights, NGO world. And so, it's a culmination of my entire life's experience to some extent. And when you said timely, it's interesting. Unfortunately, it seems that they're timely, right? It seems like some of these timely issues have been with us forever. And in a sense, maybe at least the issues are timeless.
Mm-hmm. Well, let me first of all, you talk about it. A lot of this is drawn from your experience. Why don't you tell us a little bit about you before we get into, because I'm going to want to hit up the topic on identity and hit up the topic on what's the word to take you out. What's a famous word that we're using today? I don't know what's wrong with my mind today.
Woke
erasing you.
Is that one? Well, there's so many.
Erasing you. Yeah.
Yeah, one word that I use, there's so many directions to come at it. Go ahead.
No, I'm saying before that, tell us a little about yourself.
Oh, sure. Well, I've sort of had 3 phases to my career, and it looks on the surface that they're unrelated. And in a sense, they are, except that I went through all of them. I originally started in human rights, you could say. I worked as an analyst for something called the International Monitor Institute, which was an NGO, a non-governmental organization. However, it turned out that we started getting government money. So that's a whole other story. And I got to see as a green young man how it is that the government can actually step in and control you, not by sending you to Siberia necessarily, but just waving some money, right? And from that point onward, it amazingly turned out that they had a say-so in what we should concentrate on and what we shouldn't, to put it that way. Mm-hmm. So I got to see that firsthand and transitioned from there. I was an analyst for War Crimes Tribunal, I should put it that way. The IMI was the visual evidence wing for some tribunals for the former Yugoslavia, for Rwanda, the ethnic cleansing and genocide that went on there, and for Iraq. And that was my specialty, Iraq, the former Ba'athist regime and Saddam Hussein. From there, I transitioned to documentaries. First, more, you could say, political documentaries or human rights related, child soldier, so on and so forth. And I discovered that as my role grew from originally just a researcher to then becoming, segment producer, associate producer, a field producer, whatever these titles were, that the nature of the documentaries became more and more commercial. Right. And that's, bound to happen here in Los Angeles. Mm-hmm. And then I transitioned entirely into something else, which is the world of animation, with a film called Igor, the first animated feature film that was made by an independent rather than by a studio back in 2008. We've done a couple of more since then for Netflix and Amazon Prime, and really was tied up in that world and augmented reality as well up until the pandemic, when I had some time on my hands suddenly that was forced on me like so many others. And that allowed me to really decide to go back to my roots, which is ideas. I was a philosophy major and a person interested in the root of issues rather than just the surface momentary
Deeper.
Politics of it. Yeah. And so, the pandemic gave me an opportunity. In fact, the story that I usually tell is that, I discovered myself recently that the word radical is an ancient, do you know where I'm going with this?
Yes.
Yeah, is ancient Latin and ultimately Greek word, which means the root. And so in that sense, I would describe these books as radical, the sense that they're trying to get to the root of the issue rather than just the surface momentary politics of the day and the particular mask or jargon.
Now, how do you describe identity in America?
Well, I would say I don't know if I would describe it as any different in America as anywhere else. I think it's deeply ingrained in us, including myself. I don't exempt myself from any of this. I think it's a way for us, even perhaps at a biological level, to differentiate, maybe at a genetic level. But once you associate with a certain group based on any characteristic you choose, then anyone that doesn't share that particular characteristic is the out group, right? And so one of my fundamental sort of ideas here is that I'm fine with concentrating on the specifics, black versus white, gay versus straight, whatever, nation versus nation, tribe versus tribe, and we can play that game, and I'm happy to play that game. But ultimately, unless we see that these are just all manifestations of a larger term called groupism, I'm calling it groupism, and it's an inelegant term, but I haven't found a better term that encompasses all of these things, then we're just playing a sort of, I say this in one of the books, I forget which one, a sort of musical chairs. If anyone remembers that game from childhood.
Who's the one that's left out?
That's right. Who's the one? That's right. And so, we can concentrate on, is it the people with the blue mask that are going to be standing up when the music stops, or the people with the red masks? But ultimately, wouldn't it be better if we just added a couple of more chairs rather than so a positive solution rather than a negative solution based on need? And that seems obvious when put that way, but unfortunately, I think it's not so obvious. The way our brains and our psychology is constructed.
And why don't you think we put the other two chairs?
Well, there's times where you can't, right? There's actual limits to goods and services and so on and so forth sometimes. But I make a distinction between discriminations that are necessary, hypothetically, and I'm not saying which one, and those that are not. At the very, very beginning of Mistake of Identity, I write something that's proven to be very controversial because, the left doesn't like
Let me hear it.
Sure. Yeah. It's basically, and I'm paraphrasing it poorly here, but an idea that I had back in my college days that, let's say a teacher, a professor has 5 slots, 10 slots, whatever the case may be, to take 10 students on a field trip. And it's really 10. It can't be any more. And if the teacher were to say, I'm going to, draw straws or pick, balls out of a hat, whatever the case may be, people would be okay with that in a sense. They would still be upset if they're left out, but they wouldn't feel that they were left out, particularly because of, let's say, race or
yeah.
That's right. Yeah. So they wouldn't say it's unfair. But what is it that makes that process okay? It's random. And what is random but arbitrary? Well, what if the teacher were to say, well, I'm going to take the African Americans in the group because there's 10 of them happens to be. Precisely because it doesn't matter. Precisely because their race should be ideally as irrelevant as a random draw. Mm-hmm. Now, everybody would be up in arms, of course. No, you're doing it because you're racist. And maybe he is doing it because he's racist, but it doesn't have to be that. It could be that he actually doesn't even.
That's a difficult one, right? Because
you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, how do you interpret that? I mean, if you could be pure and saying that given that we want race to be irrelevant, just using that as a discriminating factor because you only have 10 slots would be okay. But in today's society, that sort of analysis it's catered by history. Right?
Yeah, no question. No question, because then you would have to show, first of all, was it a necessary discrimination, or was the teacher just being, did he actually have a bias there?
Right.
And that's, and so, but that example is simply to make the case that ideally that's what it would be. Right. And,
at first when you said it, it kind of, it held me aback, but I'm an engineer. So when I looked at it from a numerical point of view, it's like, okay, when they're doing it randomly, why? I mean, again, if we claim that we should all be race biased, we could say, well, we'll take all the, so I see your point. I actually see your point.
I'm glad you said, because to me, I'm glad you said you're an engineer and you see it numerically, because that's actually the perspective that it's coming from. There's a theory in the moral philosophy and ethics, utilitarianism, and there's multiple variations of it. But it ultimately has to do with, maximizing happiness for the largest number of people, assuming that all souls are equal, right? All else being equal. And so from that perspective, again, if 5 people are left out, 5 people are left out. And if you are more upset by the fact that those 5 people happen to share an arbitrary characteristic, then I would say you're the groupist. Right. So it's counterintuitive. I understand this, and it can be abused, and it has been abused. But once we see that may actually be, at least from a utilitarian perspective, the ideal, then it sheds a new light right? Because the alternative is what? The alternative is for one group, to feel aggrieved. And it's not just one group. Everyone can come up with things that have happened to them, and not incorrectly. These things have happened and are happening. I don't mean to minimize that one bit or say that it's not correct. The issue is, what's the solution? Right. What's the solution? So that we don't end up in the same boat next year and the year after that and the year after that. And I believe that, mystics, whether it's in the Western tradition or the Eastern tradition, have always sort of seen this. This is not a new idea at all. But is it possible to apply this concept of a soul is a soul is a soul to our politics without it being misused by the right to just keep people down?
Don't you think we could if it weren't such an effective tool? Because my contention, and if you, I don't know how much of my show you've ever watched, but my contention is that that our economic system and our et cetera needs to have us at each other's throats. In other words, in order to thrive. Because if you actually stop looking at you and me as the enemy, we start looking at the economic system, the design of the economic system, as the real enemy. Because again, in what economic system can the few profit from the many and the many just accept it?
I don't disagree with that. In fact, I am completely, on your side. And if you put it that way, I think that groupism is used by the powerful to set people against each other. Mm-hmm. And distract them from the fact that we're all essentially being robbed blind. Right. And my issue is that people who are ideologically, and this is in the American context now specifically today, hung up on party, on Democrat versus Republican. And I'm not saying there isn't differences between them. There are, but hung up to that to the extent that it becomes another groupism where they can't judge a case, an issue case by case on its merits. They judge it more either instinctively or consciously or unconsciously based on, is that my group doing this or not? Mm-hmm. If we have time, if I could just jump into the Ukraine-Russia thing for a moment.
I tell you what, hold that thought right there, because sure. I want to bring you, now that you talk about the Democrat-Republican thing. Right now, I'm a Democrat because I caucus with the Democrats, but I'm a Bernie Sanders kind of guy, because that is where you can actually, in our current today, it's where you can affect policy. If I were in the 60s, I would probably be a Republican, because that is where policy was effected to bring, let's say, civil rights. Except for Johnson, who was a Democrat, it was a lot of Republicans that brought
That's right, they switched.
Right. So, so what I'm saying is, for me, it's not about party. For me, it's about getting effective solutions. And to do that right now, it doesn't occur in there's a particular party where it doesn't occur in. And that's the only reason I would call myself a Democrat. I just wanted to put that.
Yeah, no, I understand. In fact, I have had the thought, and I'm not the only one, the last several years, that the old notions of Democrat, Republican being left and right are really outdated in this
completely
country.
Because they're neoliberals and all that. You have
Absolutely.
To get all that picture. A Democrat is no different than a neoliberal Republican.
A Republican, absolutely. A Hillary Clinton, type of Democrat to name names here, or neoliberal, or in fact, I think the neocons and neoliberals are the same.
They're all in the same. And they just have different bases that they have to support, right?
That's right.
And I always talk about them being the rails. In other words, the left rail and the right rail. They keep this. They both move in the same direction, right? You have two rails. You have a left rail and a right rail. But guess what? They're moving in the same direction.
Yeah, it's a good cop, bad cop. It's a shuck and jive. Yeah, it's.
But anyway, right. You wanted to bring in Ukraine. It seems like we're going to move this interview in more of a conversational type. So go ahead and move it on, because this is not in your book. So let's have it.
Sure. Yeah. No. I mean, it's unavoidable right now. I have very conflicted views on this, because obviously, no question, what's going on is horrific. No. I mean, doesn't really need to be said. Any kind of aggression, war, refugees, people being killed, is a horror show. The issue that I have with our media, our Western media as a whole, and its coverage, is that it seems so suddenly suddenly aware of things that our own government is doing on a regular basis as policy. I mean, as we speak, what's happening in Ukraine is happening in Yemen by the Saudis, backed by the United States. The United States is helping them with arms, money, intelligence, backing groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS in Yemen. And we've done the same thing in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Syria. I can name 100 examples from the Monroe Doctrine onwards, right? And it's so amazing that despite all of this, having come out for years now in academia, that the media can so quickly just become the lapdogs, in my opinion, of the Pentagon and White House and CIA. And once again, this is not to diminish what's happening in Ukraine. That's real. But it's just astonishing to me that there's no self-consciousness going on, self-awareness that what the Russians are doing is very similar, unfortunately, to what the United States has done and does on a regular basis as
I
policy.
am impressed, may I say. I'm originally from Panama, Central America. 1989, Brother Bush, older Bush, sent the military in there, killed over 10,000 Panamanians. It's reported as 4,000 some places, 1,000 as others. It is no different than how the Russians indiscriminately kill to get what they want. They wanted Manuel Antonio Noriega. They got Manuel Antonio Noriega at the expense of 10,000 Panamanians. So yes, all the superpowers do the same thing. And I'm glad that you coined it exactly as I've done in several of my programs. We must go ahead and state that Russia is doing a horrendously evil thing, but let's use that put that in context to what happened in Granada, to what happened in Panama, to what happened in Santo Domingo, to what happened, and we can name. You actually went overseas. We don't even have to go overseas. We
Vietnam,
can stay
absolutely right here. Yeah.
We can stay right.
There's I don't know if he's an anthropologist by trade or a sociologist, but he's a famous writer by the name of Jared Diamond here at UCLA, close to where I live. And he wrote something that I agree with strongly some years back. He did a description of all the genocides and ethnic cleansings and that have happened just over the last 100 years. And he pointed out that in terms of the media coverage, when it's the out group that's doing the aggression and the victim is the in group, then the media of the in group goes nuts, as they should. When it's the in group committing the atrocities, it's minimized, it's ignored, it's even encouraged, unfortunately. And when it's two groups that you don't really care about, it's sort of neutral. The media barely pays any attention.
Well, I mean, I'm glad that I'm glad that you brought up the latter, because there was somebody who asked, I don't remember what interview, when one of these right wingers were really attacking Biden for, Biden's response. And the other guy said, how come we're just talking about this? This is happening all over the world right now. You're not actually, it was an interview with the redhead that I really like the way she answers questions because she's so good at it. And that is Jen Psaki being interviewed at the White House. I don't know if you know who she is, but she's a White House spokesperson. And they asked her about, Yemen and all of that. And she came out and she honestly said it. I don't think the people in Yemen would think it's not relevant. I don't think the people in Ethiopia would think that it's not relevant, that we are not going in there and fighting on their behalves.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
Why should we go in and fight on the behalf of Ukraine? It's horrendous to see the kids that Russia is killing. It's horrendous to see the destruction that's going on. But I think you hit the nail on the head.
I think that in the book, I say something along these lines. I think the moment you start to care about another person that you don't know, I add the term you don't know because clearly if it's a family member or a friend, we're going to be biased and that's just natural. But all else being equal, the moment I care more about someone who I don't know in Botswana, more or less than someone I don't know in Milwaukee, that's already the beginning of the end. There's no coming out, there's no solution to that game. And of course, we all do feel that way, whether we say it or not. if you put it that way, people realize, well, it's unfair. But at the same time, every country says America first or Russia first, whatever the case. Why Russia first? Why America first? Now, if it's because of an actual ideology, I'm all for that. I get it. I'm not one of these hippy dippies, as they say. I don't think all ideologies are the same. I don't think cultures are the same. In fact, I'm all for cultures competing with each other and showing that they may be better for the human condition than another culture. But that gets conflated and confused with the arbitrary characteristics that we did not choose. So when someone says I'm a Christian or a Muslim, how often is it that they've actually studied these things and come up with a rational decision as an adult? I would respect that much more. But almost always it happens to be where they were born. It's an identity. It's an identity and not so much a chosen ideology.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me tell you, Darius, we've gone through a whole lot. We've taken the let me first tell you, whenever you come to Politics Done Right, I always give the latitude to my guests to take the conversation wherever they want to take it. But they must remember that we are in a limited time space when we speak. I think everything that you've said been ingenious. I think folks need to go ahead and pick up your book is sort of on the philosophical, good type of reading type of a deal. I think folks should go ahead and pick up both of your books because it's worth a read. And if you listen to what you have to say, I am so sure that people are going to enjoy this. So what would you have liked me to ask you that I didn't?
Well, you've done a good job here. I would end with a sort of a paradoxical analogy. In our language, in our syntax, in our grammar, we use the term, we say that I have a body, right? We don't say I am a body. Mm-hmm. And we also say I have a brain. Again, we don't use the possessive. We use the possessive. I have a brain. We don't say I am a brain.
We don't say we are. We say it is ours. Yeah.
Have a possess. That's right. And even more strangely, we even say I have a mind. Mm-hmm. We don't say I am a mind. And now that's sort of weird, isn't it? Because what is the thing that has the mind if it's not the mind itself? Mm-hmm. I would say whatever that thing is identical in you and in me, right? Our experiences, our bodies, our memories are different, but the thing that experiences these things, that ultimate subjectiveness, is identical. And that's actually, I'll hold up the book here. The symbol on this book, which means Atman in Hinduism, in that sense, we're all one. And if we can spiritually realize that while we are playing these political games and these cultural games, that that I know, that that ultimately we didn't choose this, right? Mm-hmm. That might do a little bit in unraveling this tangled mess we have in our politics, both domestically and internationally.
Let me first say before I close out, Darius, I think that was excellent. That is, I think if we can get people to think like that, realize that these are just, color, identity, and all of that. While I believe we have to play identity politics until identities are no longer matter, it will no longer matter if we adapt exactly how. Absolutely.
But by the way, I agree with that point as well. I don't think you should unilaterally disarm.
Exactly.
That's right.
Darius Kamali, it's been my pleasure to have you on the show. The name of the two books, and I'm repeating them here because I want this is the kind of thought process I want more Americans to have. Mistake of Identity and Dog Whistling Dixie Pass the Graveyard. It's been my honor to have you on Politics Done Right. Darius Kamali.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
You can listen and or watch Politics Done Right Mondays through Fridays on Facebook Live at facebook.com/politicsdoneright or on YouTube Live at politicsdoneright.com/YouTube. Please do not forget to follow me on Twitter for updates. My Twitter handle is @Egberto Willies, @EGBERTOWILLIES. But don't you forget, listen to us live on air at KPFT 90.1 FM on Thursdays at noon and at Fridays at 11 a.m. all Central Time. Please get one of my several books out there. As I see it, Class Warfare, the only resort to right-wing doom, for a contribution of $120. It's worth it. How to talk to your right-wing relatives, friends, and neighbors for a contribution of $120. How to Make America Utopia, take away the economy from those who rigged it, for a pledge of $120. Get any two of those books for $200, any three of those books for $250. The contributions for my books go directly to support our station, KPFT 90.1 FM. Alternatively, folks, please get your basic KPFT only membership for $40, a Pacifica only membership for $25, or choose from one of our many other gifts for your contribution. Just go to kpft.org, choose Politics Done Right for the program, and select an option either for our books or something else to support the station. It is definitely worth it. Please remember to keep your community radio station in your minds. Keep KPFT on your mind. Talk about it. Tell your friends about it. Tell them you know about this station in town, 90.1 FM Houston, that needs your support. That is there to provide that nourishment that we need. KPFT 90.1 FM Houston. Well, folks, that's it for today. You know how I'm going to end this baby. My name is Egberto Willies. This is Politics Done Right. And you know how I end this baby. I am what? Out.
Welcome to Politics Done Right. I am your host, Egberto Willies. This is a progressive program that will take the mystery out of politics. This is the program that will encourage you to make sure government becomes we the people. Whether you are liberal, progressive, conservative, or otherwise, you get to air your point of view. We are an independent media outlet that, unlike mainstream media beholden to corporations, we only owe allegiance to you. Remember, you can also send me a tweet at EGBERTOWILLIES. That is at Egberto Willies. Let us engage. It is Politics Done Right.